Welcome to PhD with Women on It, Hack the Future. Some of you may have noticed that I am not the gorgeous, blonde and incredible Beata Young. No, I'm her husband, Patrick L. Young. I'm terribly sorry Beata is not well this evening. She is therefore resting while she's handed over the cudgels to me. That's just in case you thought inadvertently somehow or other she'd managed to get, say, Conchita Wurst to come along and present this particular episode of PhD. Rather, I, Patrick L. Young, I'm going to try and guide you through with the sort of feminine charm that Beata normally brings to this, her great show. Today's PhD Positivity Hack Delivered is going to be by our guest, Brenden Kumarasamy. The topic is a gripping one, ladies and gentlemen, conquering the fear of public speaking. And it's episode 42. Here we are at the answer of life, the universe, and everything. What will Brenden be able to tell us before we get to the end of conquering our fear of public speaking? But first, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, this is a grassroots community. It focuses on women on IT. It's an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders. They're supported by men as well, people like me who step in at the last minute when the presenter happens to be unwell. And I too want to say that my wife says this every week, but I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my mojo and empathy is critical where you are conquering the fear of public speaking. So in today's episode, we're going to be learning all about conquering the fear of public speaking because communication is very important in the business world. Deals and negotiations all stem from effective communication. And that, of course, includes public speaking. According to a Chapman University survey, public speaking remains one of our top fears at all time. Have you ever been so scared to stand up in front of a sea of people to deliver a speech you've memorized 100 times, only to end up with more stutters than words? This Positivity Hack Delivered episode is perfect for you. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Brenden Kumarasamy, the founder of MasterTalk. Brenden coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs and helps them become top 1% communicators in their industry. He aims to provide free access to communications tools for everyone through his YouTube channel, MasterTalk, and also these wonderful, useful community exercises such as meeting, giving heart to the hustle of this evening's Positivity Hack Delivered. Brenden, good evening. Welcome to PhD. My apologies that I am not Beata this evening and that she's indisposed. Where in the world are you today?
Patrick, it's such a pleasure to see you and great to be on this show. I'm based in Montreal.
Montreal, Quebec, Canada. That's absolutely fantastic. So, as a matter of interest, were you educated with English as your first language or French as your first language?
Actually, Patrick, great question. I was educated in French as my first language, and that's where my story begins because when I was admitted into French school when I was 5 years old, my parents really wanted me to learn the language, which I did, but I didn't know how to speak it. So my whole life, not only was I uncomfortable with presentations, I had to give presentations in a language I didn't even know. So I'd walk up to the crowd of first graders and go, bonjour. And that was my life growing up as a kid.
I'm sure you managed to progress far beyond bonjour during the course of your schooling, but I get it. It was a discomfort at communication, and that drove you to try to, well, get towards working on your public speaking. So how do we overcome our fear of public speaking, Brenden?
Yeah, excellent question, Pat. So here's the way that I think about it. Communication is like a spectrum. I don't believe in this idea of removing the fear of communication altogether. If somebody called me right now and said, Brenda, I need you to coach Elon Musk on his communication skills tomorrow, I'd probably be afraid. It's probably not something that I would say, oh yeah, this is zero stress. So it's the same situation with the fear. The goal is not to get rid of it, but rather outweigh it. So what do I mean by that? Let's use a quick analogy here. Let's say we got a boxing match. One side of the ring is the fear around communication, the anxiety, the stress that we can feel. And the other side of the ring is the message, the reason why we're delivering this. Why is this important? Why does this matter? So the goal is to make sure that when your message and your fear meet, that your message gets the knockout punch every single time. So when we think about me as a personal example, Patrick, I didn't want to start MasterTalk. I started making YouTube videos when I was 22 years old, and I started coaching C-suite executives when I was 23. But I had so much insecurity, so much imposter syndrome. Who am I to do all of this? But when I realized that I was making the videos for the 15-year-old girl who can't afford my services, that's what really led me to push through the fear, because I believe the next Elon Musk is a 7-year-old girl in Cambodia who can't afford a speech coach. So that message was way more important than the fear, and that's how you win in the end.
It's really, really interesting, because actually we have an immediate dichotomy here, I think, between the way that Beata would be handling this interview right now and I would handle this interview. And that's not because of male and female. It's actually because of a huge difference in education. And I mean, I was educated in Belfast in Northern Ireland. And the one thing that we had a really strong habit of was teaching public speaking to all the people who were there. And it didn't matter whether you want to do a boys' school, a girls' school, a mixed school. It was open to you. And I think Bat at this point would be going, we went to school in Poland, and actually when I started, it was communism, and actually nobody taught us to manage to speak in public. And that, I think, is, a terrible, terrible thing. And really, it ought to be taught in schools.
I completely agree. And just so people really understand the context here, is the fear of communication is entirely preventable. A lot of people say, oh, the fear of communication is rampant. The first cause of fear is death, and then it's public speaking. It's like, whoa, wait a second. Let's try and understand this a bit more logically. Why does the fear of communication exist? Where does it start? And to your point, Patrick, and of course, what you said about Beata, which I completely agree with as well, is the education system, whether you're born in communism or really any other system, is not built for exceptional speakers. Because think about it, every presentation is mandatory. We don't wake up one morning and say, hey, Patrick, do you want to get breakfast and present all day? Says nobody ever. Number two, every single presentation is not your topic. You never get to pick. So it's never, oh, Patrick, what do you care about? Do you care about technology? Do you care about women in IT? Do you care about nice suits? How about you present a topic that you like and we're all going to clap for you? No, that's not how the education system works. It's, oh yeah, Brenden, not Brenden, but Patrick, you're in the school system. I need you to talk about the Renaissance. And you're just sitting there thinking, what's a Renaissance? It's like a fruit. You got to present that for 10 minutes. And number three, almost 100% of your presentations, not 50%, not 75%, we're talking almost 100, are all tied to a punishment. So it's never, oh, Beata, Patrick, you're going to present something in class and we're all going to clap and throw balloons at you and celebrate. No, that's not how the education system works. It's, Patrick, I need you to present this topic that you don't really like. And if you don't do a good job, it's half your grade. And then when you get to the corporate world, it's half your job. You don't get the promotion you want. You might even get fired if you don't present really well. And that's the predicament we're in, is we're taught to believe that public speaking is a chore, and that's why most of us don't spend enough time trying to master it.
That's a brilliant point. I really, really love that. The whole idea that we're born with this idea that it's a chore, and therefore we don't really get around to actually enjoying it, just relaxing and leaning into the whole concept, which is a really, really key issue, I think. So tell us a little bit more about your story, because you told us very quickly, okay, nowadays you're creating these great videos that are for the girls in Cambodia who may be 8 years old, or wherever anyone is in the world who wants to master their public speaking, and that's a great and noble act. But you very rapidly accelerated to coaching CEOs and so on. How did that actually really catalyze?
Great question. And I would say that the summary of that, Patrick, is, and this is what I love about capitalism and business, especially for all of you listening who are starting your own businesses, moving up in your careers, is the market never lies. Okay? The market never lies. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, if you're good enough, if you have the talent to do something, eventually the market won't be able to ignore the value that you're able to deliver on the marketplace. And that's why I'm super excited, especially for women in the technology space, because there is such a talent gap in the business where if you're really good and you work for the right company, you will get promoted 100%, and you're in the right environment. And I think it's the same thing with communication, with the way that we lead, because when something is a meritocracy, we tend to be more successful. So what happened with me, and this is the advice I always like to give, Patrick, is the key to confidence is simple. Competence leads to confidence. I got that from Dan Henry. So all you got to do is simple. You practice with the people you're comfortable serving. I started with girls, 15, boys, 14 years old. Then I started coaching people my own age. Then I started coaching people a bit older than me, et cetera, et cetera. So I kept going one level up: senior analyst, manager, VP, director, CTO, and then CEO. And now a lot of my clients are vice presidents and above. But it didn't start there. It started here. And this is the big tip I have for people, whether it's in your careers or in your life, is you want to start asking yourself for your big vision, whether your big vision is to be a top level executive in the technology space, or whether the goal is to start your own business, your own startup, your own revolution. Ask yourself, what is the smallest step that I can take today to move me forward to that bigger vision? And if you keep following that trend, eventually you'll get so good that everyone will want your time and everyone will want your service and the value that you have for the marketplace.
Whoa, that is a series of fabulous messages just in the course of the first 10 or 12 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Brenden. My name is Patrick Young. I'm here as a stand-in this evening. Unfortunately, Beata Young is not well. And thank you so much, ladies, for your messages in love and in pain. It's lovely to hear from you. As always, get well soon, Beata. I will pass the message on after the show. Brenden, what to do when you suddenly have a mental block?
Yeah, it's a great question in love and in pain. Thanks for sharing that one. So here's the way that I think about it. Is there's two parts to this. One is how can we prepare so much before the actual presentation so mental blocks don't happen? And the other piece is during the actual process, during the communication situation, whether it's an interview, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a presentation, how do you optimize for both? So let's take the first example. What are we doing before? So the person who prepares the most in love and in pain, and everyone else who's listening, is the one who is going to have the most confidence. So sure, some part of how I speak and share ideas is built into confidence. It's natural talent. But I would say most of it is really built on expertise. That's why I'm able to communicate in a podcast like this, because I've done it so many times that eventually the mental block goes away. But then the other piece is during the process. During the process is a great Navy SEAL quote that I'd love to share. And the quote is this: "We never rise to the level of the occasion, but rather fall to the level of our training." So let me repeat that again. We never rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of the training. So if we do the harder thing, and I'll give you an example of what that means, it builds a resilience. Here's an example I teach my IT executives for you. The random word exercise. So the random word exercise is fairly simple. You pick a random word like pistachios, like cup, screen, and you make presentations out of thin air. But what this does is it improves your resilience, because when you're in that IT meeting and you're going through Scrum meetings, those 15-minute Scrum agile situations, when you're in those environments, it's going to be so much easier for you to present. Another fun example that's happening right now, I literally just started having a running nose the second the show started. I was like, what's going on? I wasn't sick for like ever. But notice how it doesn't seem like I'm being stressed out. I'm able to overcome this because much worse has already happened before. So it's all about adapting to the situation as well.
That's really cool altogether. And I'm actually sitting here sipping my coffee and pondering this cup, which of course has a lovely pug emblem on it. It's a unicorn, and it's something that we all drink from every day. And therefore it's a perfect modus of communication. And I'm going to make my speech out of it without a problem. That's a great focus and locus to just think about talking about a random topic. On a not random topic whatsoever, we've got Rombeat has joined us this evening. Hey, Rom, good to see you. Hello, Brenden. Great to hear your story. How did you cope with your imposter syndrome?
Great question. Could I get that person's name? Oh, Rom. Awesome. Rombeat. Excellent question. I love it. So here's an analogy, okay, that I'll give you, Robbie. Let's use me and Patrick as an example. So let's say I went to Patrick's city in Malta, and I said, Patrick, I'm new to the city. I've never really been to Malta. Can you show me around? Can you tell me what I should do in the city? And Patrick will probably tell me, right? He'll say, you know what, Brenden, this restaurant's amazing. You got to check out this place. It's a really small population. There's not much to see, so I know all the key places to take you to. And he'll probably show me around. Same thing if Patrick came to Montreal. Hey, Brenden, I'm in the city. I need your help. What should I do in the city? I say, oh, if you're not vegetarian, this is a great chicken place you got to check. You got to check out these bagels. And I'll probably tell him. But why is it that we're communicating that information to each other? Think about that one, Ram. Think about that. And everyone else. What do I mean by this? Patrick's not the mayor of his city. One of these times I'll get it wrong. He might say his dad is actually the mayor of Malta. That'll probably happen statistically at some point. And then he'll look at me and say, well, Brenden, you're not the mayor of Montreal. What do you know? You're not a tour guide. So why is it with certain pieces of information we're really open to sharing, but when it comes to our subject matter expertise, the thing we spend years honing, there's a fear, there's an anxiety around presenting that information. So why is there a discrepancy there? That's where things get interesting. I believe the discrepancy is due to the definition of what an expert actually means. Because a lot of us get lost in this. We think expertise means you need to have a PhD. You need to have a master's degree, when that's not actually true. For me, expertise is fairly simple, Patrick and everyone else. Expertise simply means I am one chapter ahead of the next person in that skill. So in the same way, Patrick can teach me a lot about wearing really nice suits. He can teach me about Malta. He can teach me about marriage. He can teach me about all the incredible things he knows, like how to interview someone on a show. I can teach him something too, around communication, around public speaking, around all of these topics. So what's the punchline, everyone? The punchline is serve the person you're comfortable serving. Think about parents. Parents coach their kids all the time, but they've never had kids in their life, but they're willing to give advice anyways. Same thing with you. Who is the person that you're comfortable serving right now? And it doesn't need to be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. It just needs to be someone you're comfortable serving. And maybe that person is just your niece, your nephew, but you need to start somewhere. I wouldn't be able to coach C-suite executives today. My oldest client today is 57, 58 years old. If I didn't start with coaching somebody I was comfortable with. And that's the secret to overcoming imposter syndrome, is understand what expertise really means.
Fabulous. I hope that answers your question. I think it was a very elegant response altogether, Romby. Thank you very much for your question this evening. And we've got, of all things, a classical reference for you. Archilochos, who was, I think, based in Paros, if I remember correctly, in ancient Greeks. He was an ancient philosopher, and apparently he may have originally said the sentence, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. But on the other hand, if the Navy SEALs are standing in front of me and they say they said it first, I'll believe them, because they're much heavier built than I am. I'm not going to argue with a Navy SEAL at any point in time. Yes, as in the old joke, what do you call a Navy SEAL, sir? Okay, so we're talking about communication. We're overcoming our fear of public speaking. We're getting through the whole concept of feeling much more relaxed with how we get there, even though we may have an element of imposter syndrome. We're talking to somebody who we feel is on our level, and therefore it's easier to communicate with us. We've been talking about cups and inanimate objects and walking around the house, creating these speeches in front of our bedroom mirror and so on. Possibly nowadays, I suppose, we'd make a TikTok of it as well to be ultra trendy. How can we present better in this online world?
Great question. So here's the way I think about it, Patrick. There's a couple of tactics, but let's focus on the principle first. And the principle is this: the biggest mistake people make, not just online, but also in the real world, is how to actually practice communication. So let's say me and you, we're got a startup together, we got a project that we need to deliver for a client, either situation, and we're practicing our pitch. And the pitch is like 30, 45 minutes. This is what we do. top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom, top to bottom. And then after 2 hours of presenting that 30-minute presentation 4 times, we're tired and we're like, let's go get some lunch. And we don't really see that much progression. Whereas the situation, the technique that I like to preach is practice your communication skills like a jigsaw puzzle. Jigsaw puzzles, I don't know if you guys do that in Malta, but you know those little toys that people used to play as kids, right? You guys are puzzle fans? Awesome. So when we think about jigsaw puzzles, the question we need to ask yourselves is, when we think about a puzzle, which pieces do we start with first and why? And most people, Patrick, tend to answer the edges. And the reason they answer the edges is because, well, Brenden, the pieces have a little corner edge to them. So they're easier to find in the box. So you put them all together and then you work your way into the middle. But we don't do that in communication. Most of us actually do the opposite. We start with the middle. We shove a bunch of content in our pitches, like shove. So much. We just shove a bunch of stuff. Then we get to our project update. We get to our founder's pitch to investors. And we ramble throughout the whole thing. And then the last presentation, the last slide sounds something like this. Yeah, so thanks. That's probably 90-95% of all presentations. But there's an easy way to fix this. Practice communication like a jigsaw puzzle. Start with the edges first. Do the introduction 50 times. Not 10 times, not 5 times. Do it 50 times. 50 times seems like a big number, but not really, because it'll take you like an hour, because each intro is a minute. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with the terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie. Same thing with the conclusion. Then tackle the middle.
Okay, and therein probably a good treatise on the latest James Bond movie, I think. It's a very interesting point, though, you do make. And it's very important, isn't it, when you're looking at the structure of however you present. So how much importance, you put a lot of importance on the introduction, a lot of importance on the ending. How do you keep the middle bit going?
Absolutely. So for me, like everything, Patrick, public speaking is a momentum game. Right. As we get better with our introduction and our conclusion, we go, wow, we're really good at this communication thing. Because I guarantee you, nobody on this call has done an introduction 50 times, 75 times, or even 25 times for the most part for a presentation they're preparing for. But what happens is when you do it like that, you start to see incremental improvements very rapidly. You go, wow, I'm so good at this communication thing. This life that we're living, everything is amazing. Same thing with communication. So when we go back to the incremental pieces of our presentation, we start to see a lot of improvements really rapidly. And then after we're finished our intro and our conclusion, and we start thinking about the middle, this is the only question you need to think about with the middle, Patrick, is what is one idea that you want to share with the world? Out of everything that you're sharing, what is one key idea you want people to take away? And then from that key takeaway, ask yourself, what are 3 ways to defend that key idea? Let me give you a practical example here. So in my case, whenever I appear on a podcast or a live show, whenever I give a keynote, whenever I do a YouTube video, my intention is this. How do I make sure that at the end of my conversation, that people are convinced that they can become exceptional communicators? If I can convince you that you can be a great communicator by giving you simple advice and pieces of feedback, then it becomes easy. But now the other question is, how do I convince people of that key idea? So one of the key pieces that I use in my keynotes is my own personal story. If this guy can go from, which is me, if I could go from presenting in my second language my whole life to being a speaker that sounds like this, imagine what everyone in this community can do with their communication skills. And it's the same story. But notice how that story defends the key idea so well. Because when people hear that story, they go, well, if Brenden could do it, I can do it too. So when you think about your content, all I want you to think about is, what is the one key idea you want people to leave this room with? And what are 3 ways, 3 strategies, 3 anecdotes, 3 analogies, 3 data points that you can use to defend that message? And that will come over time.
Okay, so you've got to find those ways to defend your message. You got to think and structure what you're talking about. That's really, really cool. We got a very kind comment from Rombeat there. She's saying, thank you very much. I'd take any advice from you, Brenden. Oh, a nice big heart too. Looks like you got an admirer. Excellent answer. And then we got a question from Marianne Madeira. Hello, Marianne. Good evening. It's lovely to see you once again on PhD. And just so that you understand, ladies and gentlemen, I may be presenting one time only, but I'm a regular viewer of this show and often I help in the gallery. But this evening we've got a fabulous production team. Everything that is powering this show is run by ladies this evening. It just so happens because unfortunately my wife Beata is ill. I've had to step in at the last minute and present the show. But I'm delighted to be here with Brenden Kumarasamy. We're talking about, well, conquering the fear of public speaking. How electrifying a topic is that? Back to Marianne's question. Marianne, thank you so much. Brenden, thank you so much for your jigsaw puzzle trick. Totally agree with you, Marianne. We'll definitely use it. Meanwhile, she says she loves my mug. Well, thank you very much. I'm trying to get an added bit of pink into the show this evening to show my feminine side. Pink pen, pink shirt, pink, whatever I could manage to throw together as I was getting dressed this evening, because clearly I am not a girl otherwise, and therefore we're having a very rare Woman on It show, which is the first and probably the only show we'll ever have that had two blokes speaking on it. However, stay tuned for our special Christmas show, which is going to be coming in, I do believe, a week's time, which is going to be an opportunity to turn the tables, where Beata is going to be asking the questions once again with a bevy of male guests. Brenden, we're talking about this whole world. Marianne's appreciating your remarks, appreciating your structure, your concepts, so on. Let me ask you something. Speeches, written or made up as you go along? Notes? How do you think is the best way to approach the speaking pattern?
Right. So it really depends on the situation, I would say, Patrick. So let's use a few examples here that will resonate with everyone in the technology space. Is if you're a woman CEO right now, you're running your own startup, your own technology business, I would say it is absolutely crucial in your pitch to write everything word for word. No excuses. And the reason is simple, because you don't have a lot of time to pitch. So let's say one of you are in Y Combinator right now. You're doing a demo day. You're in an accelerator like Techstars. You only have a few minutes to pitch these investors. So you want to make sure that you're optimizing every single second. And the only way to do that, to be quite honest, is to write out everything word for word. That's how you optimize a pitch. But in some situations, you won't have to do that. So let's say this conversation I'm having with Patrick right now, I'm of course not writing or saying answers that have already been memorized, but I've just answered these questions so many times that it comes more comfortably for me. So what I always like to say is start with written and then work your way up to improvised. But don't go on to improvised until your technique is mastered in written. What do I mean by this? I see it like as in 3 steps. Let's say we take a startup pitch. Number 1, you write it out word for word. No questions about it. Number 2, you add technique to it, to that speech. Are you saying less filler words, less ums and ahs? Are you saying more vocal tones, high vocal tones, low vocal tones? You're adding all of these techniques in. And then once you get really good at written plus technique, then go to improvised. That's the strategy that I always like to take on. So for instance, like your scrum meetings with your team, if you're a corporate executive at like Google, well, for those, you don't have to prepare 7 hours for a 15-minute meeting. Now, in that situation, it's about understanding what are the meetings that are high impact for the week, which ones, for example, if you have a meeting to discuss your career goals with people 3 levels above you, that's a meeting you want to prepare tooth and nail for. But if you're doing a scrum meeting and you're low risk, right, and it's not a high urgent deliverable, you don't have to prepare 7 hours for that either. So it's all about understanding the situation you're in and adapting and optimizing your time for the best results.
It's a very good point, optimizing your time. But at the same time, as you say, so much easier when you've practiced, when you've written loads of speeches, when you've prepared and practiced and practiced and practiced, and you just become more habituated to the ability to speak well, which I think is vitally, vitally important. Now, when it comes to presenting, we've asked the general question of how can we present better in this online world, but what degree of props do we need? online or offline, in terms of, it strikes me a lot of people can't be seen dead without 150 PowerPoint slides. And a lot of the time, I'm not so convinced that it wouldn't just be better if they got up there and actually talked.
Great points on this. Here's the way that I think about this, Patrick, to keep it super simple for people, is the boardroom is the worst place to practice in the world for your communication skills. And I'll explain why. One, your presentations are always stressful. Two, your presentation's always changing. Hey, Patrick, can you do this for the Scrum meeting? And then on Wednesday, it's, oh, Patrick, could you actually do this RFP bid for this Fortune 500 client? And then it's always changing. And number three, every presentation's tied to a punishment. Or if you don't do a good job, you'll get smacked in the face. Well, maybe not literally, but figuratively, right? Because you have to deliver, especially if you're a VP and above, you're a manager, you're a director, and your IT organization. So given that risk, what I would say to keep things super simple, and this is what I tell my IT execs, is let's practice outside the boardroom. Let's do something fun. Let's do something something that you're super passionate about, whether it's teaching coding to teenage girls. Pick one topic, whether it's marketing to teenage girls, it doesn't matter, right? And then you want to spend all your time just making that single presentation the best presentation of your life. And what happens is communication is like a domino effect, Pat. So what happens is as you get better with that one single presentation, you automatically get better 20%, 10% at every presentation you give in your life. So it's because I've perfected my presentations that when I go into conversations, I'm able to use the techniques, the tools, the strategies, the resources from how I learned presentations into conversation. Here's an easy example. If I say no filler words in my presentation, I need to ask myself back the question, hey, Brenden, when you're in that conversation with Patrick, are you saying less filler words too? Are you applying what you learned in presentations to your day-to-day conversations? Now, that's the magic. So what I encourage all of you to think about, don't stress about the slides, don't stress about all that. So don't create dependencies that require you to check a box to present something, because that just creates stress. I think the better strategy is focus on momentum. Do one presentation outside of the boardroom, something that you do give back. I'll give another quick example in the technology space. I used to work at IBM as a consultant, and a lot of the technology executives there did a lot of design thinking workshops for teenage girls to help them think in that way. That's a good example of a give back, but if you focus all of your energy on making that better, you see the impact, you see the results that come from those girls or those boys that you're helping, and it makes you an overall better presenter. And then you'll rely less on the notes, you'll rely less on the slides, and you'll be a lot more comfortable as a speaker.
Two fabulous points in there, I think, are really, really good. I love the concept of slide dependency. I think that's a great phrase, because we've seen far too many people who spend their whole time looking over their shoulder at what's on the PowerPoint screen rather than actually communicating with the audience, which loses so much power. It's a really, really powerful point that you're making there. And I think the other one is focus on momentum. Just get in there and, as Winston Churchill was famous for what I will refer to as the acronym as KBO. And if you don't know what KBO stands for, well, it's not suitable for work. You can do that research in your own time, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure Uncle Google will tell you, but it's certainly a momentum play. It's all about momentum all the way through. Now, we've also got another question here, I do believe, looming from Rombeat. Oh, yes. What's the most common mistake people make when preparing for a pitch or a speech?
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and discuss both from beats. Let's start with pitch for my CEO founders in the room. And don't worry, I used to be a venture capitalist, so take the advice. It'll definitely give you the impact that you're looking for. I would say the biggest mistake founders make with their pitch is they don't communicate their founder POV enough. What is that? Founder POV is when you communicate your thesis as a founder on where the future of your business is going. I'll give you a great example of this. When Airbnb's Brian Chesky, the CEO of the company, pitched Airbnb in 2008-9, when everyone thought he was crazy, the way he explained the business was this: when we lead with design that optimizes for trust, we can scale this transaction between buyers and sellers in the marketplace on Airbnb at scale. Because before, what happened with VRBO and HomeAway and all the other competitors is people didn't trust each other enough in the marketplace, so people don't transact enough times. But now with Airbnb, because the culture is very design led, they're really empathetic to both sides of the transaction: the person who's renting out the Airbnb and the person who's using the Airbnb for a few days. So what happened, and the other piece that he mentioned in his pitch deck, is because of the recession, a lot more people will be more inclined to become hosts of Airbnbs, even if it's against societal culture, because they need the extra money. And he was absolutely bang on that thesis, because the number of hosts exploded and Airbnb was on a massive growth curve at the right time. So we want you to communicate your founder POV more, especially for my women in the room. What I've noticed, because I've coached a lot of women CEOs in the technology space, is they don't communicate their point of view enough proactively like men do. They wait for the venture capitalist, the investor, to ask them the right questions. But a lot of time, ladies, they won't ask you the right questions. It's up to you to communicate that value up front, explain how smart you are about the industry. And there's a lot of great women entrepreneurs you can use as examples that I personally love. Sarah Blakely from Spanx, study her. She's amazing at communicating value and value prop. I also like Jennifer Hyman, who's the CEO of Rent the Runway. The way she explains her value prop is really solid. Those are two in particular that I really enjoy listening to, and how they pitch their solutions. So that's the founder POV. For my executives in the room, for speeches, I would say the most common mistake is definitely not practicing the correct structure. So most of them just practice, 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 but they're not intentional enough about the energy that they bring. And here's something that you can write down that I'll explain twice, that applies to both demographics, whether you're CEO, whether you're an exec. Is everything that comes out of your mouth is a reflection of your personal brand in the boardroom. Everything that comes out of your mouth is a reflection of your personal brand in the boardroom. And I'm sure a lot of us with meetings, we just walk in and we go, yeah, there's another one meeting. Whereas when you present that way, when you showcase yourself that way, you're also getting judged by everyone else in the room by how you show up. So I encourage you, every time you step into a meeting, you want to sound like leader A. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. It's great to be here. Versus leader B. Yeah, hi, everyone. If you have any questions, let me know. Bring more energy into the conversations.
Brilliant. Mega points altogether. And I have to move on very quickly, actually, because we've got a bunch of questions which are looking really, really cool, Brenden. So let's move to those, because we've only got just over 20 minutes left. Ladies, my name is Patrick Young. I'm just stepping in this week for an ill Beata Young. She's going to be back next week for Positivity Hacks Delivered, more hacking the future from her. Agata Bellon. Hello, Agata. Great to hear from you. Great presentation. On presentation, smiley face. How can we practice to get rid of word whiskers in our speech?
I'm assuming word whiskers means ums and ahs.
Precisely. It's a very English description of ums and ahs is the word whisker.
I just learned something new. I've never seen that before, even if I have a lot of UK clients. So interesting. Thanks for sharing. So what I would say here, Agatha, is the best way to remove filler words, ums and ahs in your speech, is to replace them with silences. So notice how in this conversation, I haven't said any filler words, or very little. And the question you need to ask yourself is, why is that? Let's start with, why do we say filler words in the first place? The reason is to buy time. So Patrick asked me a question. I don't know the answer. And this is how most of us respond. Oh, right, Patrick, here's the answer. So notice how I'm using filler words to buy myself time to think. Whereas what exceptional speakers do is they replace all of that with silences. So when Patrick asks the question, instead of going, Patrick, this is the answer, they go, Patrick, great question. So here's what I'm thinking and how we can approach this. So notice how we're pausing. And this is a secret the best speakers in the world never tell you, is that we can pause forever without making it seem awkward at all. In my live workshops, I actually pause for 5 minutes. It freaks people out in the room, and I just stare at them. And this is the exercise that I recommend, is what I call the endless gaze. Find someone in your house, could be your spouse, could be your kids, could be nieces, nephews, people in your home, and just stare at them for 5 minutes and don't say a word. You're allowed to blink. This is not a blinking contest, but you just have to say nothing. And most people can't last more than 60 seconds. So improve your resilience. So when you go back into the boardroom and you're pausing for 3 seconds, that becomes much easier for you to swallow.
Very, very interesting. Fascinating concept altogether. Last time I tried a staring concept, it was with my cat, and he attacked me, actually. So don't try it perhaps on animals. Just try it on maybe children, adults, something like that. Now, that is a very, very good and fascinating conversation piece discussing the whole art of the word whisker, as Agatha Bellon has mentioned. Another thing coming up is second languages. And you mentioned earlier on how you learned originally to speak French when you were at school, but you're also a native English speaker. Justina Rich. Justina, great to see you. Thank you very much for joining PhD in Bata's absence. I am very excited to roll up my sleeves and improve my public speaking. Thank you for your tips and motivation. I am not a native English speaker, and many times I have this thought, borrowed from a TV show. You don't know how smart I am in my native language. It's very challenging when you want to present yourself in the best way, but then fear is taking over. Great chat.
I love that so much. Thanks so much, Justina. It's a wonderful question. I love that quote also. You don't know how smart I am in my second language, my native language, excuse me. Very well said. So let me start by saying I'm empathetic to this. I speak 3 languages personally, English, French, and Tamil, and I keynote a lot in French, and it's a challenge because French is not my first language. So I struggled a lot when doing this. So trust me, I got the answer. But before I give the answer, let me start by reassuring everyone in this room. The difference between your first and your second language, because I see this a lot in my day-to-day work, is not intelligence, guys and gals. It's not intelligence. A lot of us go, oh, we have a lot of insecurity around presenting English and particularly as a second language. We go, oh, I'm not smart enough. And we need to get rid of that because it has nothing to do with intelligence, to what Justina said in the quote that she had from that TV show. The difference is simply this: culture and vocabulary. Culture and vocabulary. The only challenges here that we need to talk about is there's words in your first language that you just don't know in your second language, which is perfectly okay. And the other piece is culture. Because you grew up in your culture, you understand the nuances of that culture in a way you wouldn't with English, as an example, let's say. Typical, I would say most people, it's first language is Mandarin or Hindi or French, and second language is English. That's generally the mix most of the time. So when we transition to English, as an example for the majority, we don't really know the culture and the vocabulary as well. So that quote that sounds so good in Spanish, when we translate it to English, doesn't really make any sense. That stresses us out. So here's all you have to do, Justina. There's 3 steps to this. I have a video on my YouTube channel, but I'll give you the summary. Number 1, write your speech in your first language. Write your speech in your first language. That's the language you understand. You know the culture, you know the vocabulary. Goes back to your amazing quote. You don't know how smart I am in my native language. So show it. Show how smart you are in your native language. Write your speech in that first language. Whether that first language is Cantonese, whether that first language is Hindi, whether it's French, Spanish, doesn't matter. Then what you do, number 2, translate that script into the language you need to speak it in. So I'll use a personal example. My first language is English. My second one is French. My third one is Tamil. So I write my speech out in English. Then number 2, I translate it into French. So take your script in Mandarin, take your script in Hindi, take your script in Spanish, and translate it to the language you need to speak it in, which is generally English. And then do step 3. Step 3 is the most important one. This is where people get lost. This is the one. Okay, so pay attention to step 3. Step 3 is do what I call a vocabulary test. So what's a vocabulary test? Vocabulary test simply means take your presentation, your speech you just translated, and present it to native speakers of that language. So let's say we take Justine as an example. Let's say her first language is French and her second language is English. So here's what Justina should do. She should write the speech in French, translate it to English, and then present her English speech to people like me whose native language is English. So that I could look at Justina's speech and say, wonderful, great presentation, Justina. Here's a couple of things I would tweak. You know, these words that you use here, they don't actually work in the English language. This is what it sounds like. This is what you need to change it with. So when we're tweaking her language, she improves super quickly. And that's what happened with me is I took my script in English, translated it to French, and then I presented it to French native speakers. And they said, by the way, Brenden, what you just said there in French doesn't make any sense because that's a direct translation from English. You need to say this instead. So then whenever I presented, I had a lot of confidence because somebody else who's way smarter than me corrected my language in French. And then build your confidence up. So start like that. It's like training wheels. And then over time, you'll have so much confidence that you won't need to do that anymore.
Very interesting altogether. So write your speech in your first language you're suggesting, translate it to the language you need to speak in, but then do a vocabulary test. Make sure that you're still comprehensible in the language you're speaking to. And actually, Agatha Bellon is making a comment to that effect as well. She sympathizes with Justina. So many times I wanted to say a joke in English and felt trapped by the lack of words. Just keep going. Hashtag woman on it. Hack the future. And it's true, actually. I mean, it's a great point altogether. Thank you very much, says Justina Rish. It's obviously a useful answer. Justina, we really appreciate your question. It's great to have you interacting with Women on It once again. Thanks so much for being a part of the show. It's really fascinating when you look at the whole issue of how people do communicate, and indeed, well, how you can be separated by the same language, even on one side of the Atlantic to the other. Word whiskers being a very good example of another piece of vocabulary you've added today, which is obviously not in common parlance in North America. And also for those of us who come from Europe, we're always confused because we get to North America and people answer the phone and they say, I'll be with you momentarily. And we always go, no, we want you to be with us in a moment, not momentarily, because to us that just means I'll be with you. Okay, bye. And then you move on to the next thing, which is momentarily, as far as we understand it. So you can evolve those sorts of interesting linguistic twists as we go along. So we've looked at how to manage to overcome our fear of public speaking. We've talked about how we can present better in this world. I mean, one thing we haven't actually spoken to, but you've given us lots of great examples of them, storytelling. That strikes me as being an essential part of what we're looking at here when you're communicating.
Oh, yeah. Storytelling is definitely important. But I will say, because my opinion on this is very different than most in my industry, Pat, is I don't believe storytelling should be the focus. I know a lot of my colleagues would disagree on me. They say, storytelling is everything. How you tell stories. I think there's a couple of steps before that, especially for my IT industry, right? Since this is where most of my clientele is understand this. You've spent a lot of your life as developers, technical resources, as project managers, early on project manager. You probably did a lot of tech stack work before you ventured on into managing people. So for this specific population, my recommendation is don't worry about storytelling for now. I think the focus for all of you who are listening is really foundations first. Unless you're a startup CEO. So let's draw a couple of nuances here. But for all of you, I would say number one is, are we getting rid of the filler words? Are we practicing our pauses? Are we bringing in more technique into our speeches? Then once we knock that off, then we can focus on storytelling. But foundation should really be the punchline. And the reason is because in our industry, in particular in the IT space, storytelling is already a tiny percentage of people who can pull it off. But even foundation, I know people who just get really good at foundations and they could easily become SVPs in corporations because most great technical talent are not great communicators. It's very rare to see someone who has very strong technical prowess and who is exceptional at communication. I mean, the only example that comes to mind right now is people like Nathan Blakarczyk, right? The chief technology and strategy officer at Airbnb. He's very good at technical prowess and communication, but he's not like a credible storyteller. And that's really what I want to drive for this industry is let's start with the foundations. Let's get the filler words gone. Let's focus on vocal tone variation. Let's focus on pacing. And then when we get comfortable in that, then let's work on story tone. But I'll give you kind of a one-on-one on story tone, just as a small tip for people. And the one-on-one storytelling is simply this. Every story should have an outcome, and every outcome should lead from a story. So what do I mean by that? Is whenever we think about storytelling, always ask yourself first, not what story you want to tell, but which outcome, which lesson you want people to take away. Let me give you an example for those of you who have been tuning in from the beginning of this episode. When somebody asked me about storytelling and more specifically around imposter syndrome, notice how I didn't just go straight into my lesson for imposter syndrome. I told a story about if I visited Patrick in Malta and I would ask him for directions, or if he came to Montreal, I told a story. But the story wasn't meaningless. The story was to lead to my outcome, the lesson that I wanted to drive, which is understanding what expertise really means. And I tied in that story to that outcome. So what you need to ask yourself is, what is the outcome and what is the story that you want to tell? I'm going to focus specifically on my startup CEOs in the room. So for all of you ladies, the focus is ask yourself this question. What is the outcome that you want to deliver in your pitch? Super simple. You want to convince people that you're right about the future. Whether you're in the beauty business, whether you're in the supply chain business, whether you're in the SaaS business, doesn't matter. You want to convince them that your point of view about the future of that business is correct for the product that you're building. So with that outcome in mind, you need to figure out what is the right story to tell to drive that outcome. And generally, that story is around solving your own pain point. If that is the case, that's generally the best type of story you want to tell. I was at the SaaS business. I had a lot of trouble. I saw this gap in the market, so I started building this software. Good example of someone who did that perfectly is Mark Benioff, right? The CEO of Salesforce. He used to be an executive at Oracle. He saw a huge gap in the CRM space, and then he went to go build Salesforce. Same thing with you. Find a gap in the market, explain that gap in your story. So that's just an example of outcome-based storytelling. Start with the outcome. What are we trying to do? And then build a story around that outcome. But once again, focus on foundations that will already put you ahead of 90-95% of the industry.
Whoa, here we are conquering the fear of public speaking with Brenden Kumarasamy. It's a really, really gripping show altogether. My name is Patrick L. Young. I have stepped in temporarily for 1 week only to replace Beata Young because unfortunately she is unwell and couldn't be with you this week. So ladies, if you're watching, please send a little love. Put a little heart at the bottom of your whatever you're watching this on, whether it's on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. Send us a little love, please. Show Beata that you appreciate and want her to get well soon so that she can be back next week to present a gripping show altogether. Brenden, let me ask you, none of us are able to achieve success along the way all alone. Is there a particular person you're grateful towards or who helped you get you to where you are? Can you share a story about them and what they did for you?
Oh, so many to count. You know, my coach tells me this all the time, Patrick. He says, the bigger the dream, the better the team. The bigger the dream, the better the team. If you have big aspirations for your life, mentorship, I think, is so crucial. Whether it's for your communication, whether it's for getting more customers, knowing how to drive a business success, or anything you want to achieve in life. But I'd say the one in particular that resonates with me always is the CEO of Charity Water, Scott Harrison. I think Scott is an absolute savant, not just in storytelling, but also the way that he thinks about philanthropy. He has an amazing book called Thirst by Scott Harrison that I highly recommend to everyone who's listening. It's actually so important in my life that I literally have 2 copies of the book behind me to remind me of how important of a read it is. And essentially what Scott's story is he was a nightclub promoter in his 20s in New York City, did really well in his life, had all the right things, all the right lifestyles, but he hated his life. He was the worst human being he knew. And then he started Charity Water, and it went on to raise hundreds of millions of dollars for clean water access for the world. And there's a great quote in the book I'd love to share with everyone. And the quote is, "The goal is not to live forever, but rather create something that will." And when I heard that quote, I said, what can I create in this world that will live forever? What can I do to make a better impact? And that's when I really thought about the MasterTalk play, helping people who don't have access to free communication tools. That's why I'm particularly passionate about this show, because the IT industry, I believe, is the future, right? Technology is going to disrupt every single industry in the world. And, as we all say, software is going to eat up the world. And I want to make sure that the next Elon Musk of our society that nobody believes in right now has access to those free tools. So I encourage all of you to find the impact of what you're doing, to lead with service, to lead with giving, and to follow Scott Harrison, because I think he's an absolute genius.
Fabulous altogether. I'm not aware of Scott Harrison at all. We're sending lots of love and hearts coming through there from Justina Ridge. Thank you so much, Justina. I will pass those on as well to Beata to make sure that she gets well soon. The bigger the dream, the better the team. That's an absolutely gripping quote altogether. And also this whole concept that the goal is not to live forever, but to create something that will. That's a very, very powerful message altogether. And I suppose actually that runs us into two questions that are habitually asked, and perhaps you've already given us the answers at this stage, Brenden. What's the number one book you can sit and think, oh, I wish I'd read that before I started my career?
Definitely Thirst by Scott Harrison. I think he's amazing. A lot of people expect me to say Dale Carnegie or different. And by the way, like I love their work too. But I always like to use this space to talk about books no one really focuses on. Because remember, if you're reading the same books everyone else is, you're going to learn the same thing everyone else is. So if you want an edge in the marketplace, you want an edge in what you're doing, you always want to read books that nobody else is reading. No one really talks about that. So that's why I think Thirst is an excellent use case on how we can use storytelling to make a change. And here's why it's particularly interesting to the IT industry, is because a lot of people in IT are flush with cash. Whereas with Scott Harrison, he was in the nonprofit space, right? So he had to storytell like his life depended on it, because it's not as easy. The capital incentive is not the same as it is in capitalism, in pure capitalism, where we're exchanging value for a service. Whereas a nonprofit, I have to convince you to give Scott money, but you don't really get anything in return besides, the well-being. So understanding what he did in the nonprofit space can really educate us as founders, as executives, on what to do in the for-profit space, which is much easier, I believe, to navigate through.
Fabulous. So Scott Harrison, Thirst, that's the book that you recommend. And therefore, do you have, apart from the cornucopia of quotations that you've offered us already this evening, a favorite life lesson quote?
Absolutely happy to share. Especially for those of you who made it all the way to the end of this episode, I say congratulations, because you're somebody who is investing 58 minutes today, for those of you who are from the beginning of this live, to be better. So here's a quote that I figured out sometime in my basement that I love to share. And the quote is this: be insane or be the same. If you want to be like everyone else, that's totally fine. But if you want to make a difference in the world, you want to do something special with your life, and I pretty much guarantee everyone who's listening right now, because you made it to the end, wants to do something special with their life, the only thing that matters is this. Don't you find it odd that this 22-year-old kid, or used to be, started a YouTube channel, not on pranks, not on music, not on dance videos, but on public speaking and executive communication? And then he went on to coach those executives, yet he still lives in his mother's basement. He owns a used car. He loves Justin Bieber. He dances alone in that basement an hour a day and doesn't plan on moving out of his mother's house. How does this make any sense at all? And that, my friends, is the point. When every decision in your life makes sense to the only person that should, which is you, you'll probably become very successful in life. So be insane or be the same is what I'd say.
What else can one say to that quotation, apart, I think, possibly from woof? It seems the only appropriate answer for this episode 42, the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. Of course, as you will recall, if you've ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, brilliant maxim on which we're coming towards an end of the show. But we've got that epic question, the one that has to be asked. One of these days, we're going to be able to say the pandemic is over. But of course, right now, we're under Omicron and everybody's panicking once again, or at least certain people are. Imagine the pandemic is over, Brenden, and you can invite any person to breakfast anywhere in the world. Who would you love to have a private breakfast with, and why? Who's this? You
I
choose.
I guess I'm a Scott Harrison super fan. I'd love to meet him someday, and I'm making strides right now to make that happen this year. But yes, I think Scott is someone I deeply admire. He's a thought leader. He is a savant. I think he's really doing a lot of important things in the world. And he's also a great example that I forgot to mention of what focus actually means. When you focus on a single problem, in the same way he's focused on the water crisis for almost 15 years now, that's the result. Right? Another good example I can give you is Tony Robbins. Right, I was at a Tony Robbins seminar a few weeks ago, and I'm doing his seminar right now as well this week. And if there's anything I learned from Tony, he's the result of focusing in one industry for 45 years. That's why he's so successful, because he minimizes the distraction and he focuses on getting the bullseye in what he's working towards. So yes, I would definitely have a great conversation with Scott. I'm sure there's a lot of ways that I can add value to what he's doing and help him achieve his mission.
And where's that going to be, that breakfast?
That I didn't think of that though. That's a great question. Probably near his house to make it more convenient for him, so he doesn't have to fly out for this.
There you go. You're so friendly and helpful. And I have to say, it's a delight to hear that you didn't choose Elon Musk or Oprah Winfrey, who seem to have been running a lot of the time recently, although we have had some other very, very exciting alternatives as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we're at that point where the show is coming towards its final remarks. And at this juncture, Beata, were she here this evening, she's convalescing after a little bit of illness, she would add Confucius's wonderful quote: tell people and they may forget. Show them, they may remember, but involve them and they will understand. Next week, we're going to have Laughter is the Best Medicine. That's going to be presented with Emma Stride. She's an award-winning and amazing woman, possibly one of the few people who ever stands up in front of an audience of CEOs dressed as a banana. Got to be an unmissable show once again, just like Brenden this evening. You can catch that next Wednesday, same place, same time. Because remember, when you focus on the positives get more positive. And as always, our positivity quote comes from Positive Thinking Only and goes, look for something positive in each day, even if some days you have to look a little bit harder. Because our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising every time we fall, as Confucius noted, or Jeanette Wallace's great rejoinder: sometimes you need a little crisis to get your adrenaline flowing and help you realize your potential. Because, as we like to say so often in this show, if Beata were here, she would be echoing these words right now. If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Today, ladies and gentlemen, is your day to hack the future. Hack the positivity you want. Thank you so much to Brenden Kumarasamy. It's been such a fantastic show. The fear of communication is entirely preventable, and I can tell you it is. In only 63 minutes, it's been totally, I think, obliterated for all those who've been watching this show. Thank you very much, Taylor, for your comments in Love and in Pain, Richard Turner, Rombeat, Woman on It. We've had talk from within inside the office, Marianne Madeira. It's been wonderful to hear from all of you during the course of this show, particularly also Justina Rij, Agata Ballon. Thank you one and all for making this another great community show on behalf of Women on It. I'm delighted to say that my name is Patrick L. Young, and I will be redundant next week from the perspective of this show, because Beata's going to be back to present the next Positivity Hack Delivered. It remains only for me to say we look forward to next week with our next guest, Emma Stride. But for now, thank you, Brenden Kumarasamy. The market never lies. Avoid your slide dependency and focus on momentum. Great maxims, just 3 of many you've said during the course of today's excellent presentation. On behalf of all of the Women on It team, thank you very much to our great producers this evening, Armenia, Racy, and Micah. You've been superb. Brenden, thank you very much. My name is Patrick L. Young, and I'm saying good night for the first and final time on behalf of PhD.